Have you ever lost something really important and you just couldn't find it? Your car keys, your COVID vaccine card, the password to your 401k. I bet it was pretty frustrating. But try losing a $193 million spacecraft. That's not something that happens every day, but it did happen about 25 years ago to a group of engineers at NASA. Back then, like now, Mars was on our minds, and NASA had begun a series of short missions to explore if Mars would one day be habitable and what kind of discoveries and investments would be possible later down the line. One of those missions involved a small spacecraft called the Mars Climate Orbiter. The orbiter had antenna and solar panels and was about as large as LeBron James. And the mission at first began as a success. It launched in December of 1998, and everything seemed to be going according to plan until it didn't. About 9 months later, in September of 1999, NASA suddenly lost all contact with the orbiter. It was literally lost in space. 24 hours later, NASA called off its search and declared the mission a failure. It was a $193 million mistake. In its after-action report, NASA made a surprising revelation. The problem with the orbiter wasn't hardware. It was human. During the development stage, two teams were working on the orbiter's navigation system. One was working in English units, the other in metric. And as every kid in the United States can tell you, bad things happen when Americans try using the metric system. The result? The navigation system was off by just the smallest of margins, but it was big enough to throw the orbiter off course. We'll never really know exactly what happened to the orbiter, but it's likely that it blew up as it entered Mars's orbit just slightly above where it should have approached. The tragic ending, but here's where the story really gets interesting. We should never have lost the orbiter. It turns out that two scientists working on the navigation system noticed this discrepancy early on and tried bringing it to the attention of senior engineers. Their feedback was noted, and their concerns were largely ignored. The feedback system broke down, communication stalled, and for that, NASA paid a very steep price. I'm Joe Hirsch, and I'm on a mission to help leaders avoid these sort of costly mistakes by making sure that they can set the right conditions for high trust, high impact communication at work. As a speaker and trainer, I've shared my work and research with executives and senior leaders across 3 continents with some of the world's most admired brands and organizations, as well as in outlets like Harvard Business Review, TEDx, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, and CNBC. And today, I'm hoping that we can take a closer look at why things like the orbiter disaster happened, and more importantly, to explore the steps that we can take to make sure that it doesn't happen again. It all starts with something called performance agility, the set of beliefs and behaviors that energize work, deepen relationships, and drive improvement. As organizations continue to define and redefine how and where work gets done, the time has come to democratize performance by replacing power with partnership. How two-way dialogue, continuous collaboration, and fearless feedback can unlock fresh insights about human potential and set the conditions for more candor, clarity, collaboration, and yes, even humanity in the workplace, wherever work gets done. So how do we do it? Let's start literally at the top with the mindset that we bring to all of these performance conversations and how we evaluate performance. For many leaders, especially now during times of great uncertainty, performance management is about telling and selling. These leaders try to tell you what's wrong and then sell you on their version of how to fix it. I call people like that window gazers. Now, we have people today at Work Human Live from all over the world, but let's say you and your friend happen to be in a snowy place and you're looking out the window at the snow-capped peak. You turn to your friend and you say, "Man, that is just stunning. The mountains, the snow, beautiful." Your friend turns right back to you and says, snow? Looks more like slush. One picture, 2 views. And while that's perfectly fine to have a difference of opinion, things get complicated when we introduce rank and power and hierarchy into the equation. If I'm your manager and I'm telling you my version of events, how you performed in a sales call or how you participated in a team meeting or responded to a client request. There's really just one view here, and that view belongs to me, the gazer, the person with the power and the perspective. Now, according to research, this approach of window gazing can have a very limiting effect on performance. For starters, it introduces all sorts of rater bias into the equation. One study showed that nearly 60% of the time, the feedback that's delivered has more to do with what the feedback giver believes than what he or she actually sees. The reason why feedback so often feels judgmental is because it is. We're not just getting someone else's perception of the work that we do. To the recipient of feedback, the message can even sound like a verdict on who we are. That's assuming, of course, that the person who's giving you feedback can actually remember what's happened. Memory researchers talk about a so-called forgetting curve, that as soon as we absorb new information, there's a sudden and steep loss of data. Some people put it at about 50% loss, which is then followed by a slow, steady decline over time. A week later, after having learned something new, we're likely to forget almost 90% of it unless there's some sort of active retrieval process along the way. Think about those implications now when it comes to giving feedback at work. In some organizations, it can be weeks, maybe even months before there's a conversation about performance. And by the time we get around to having these conversations with the people on our team, neither the giver nor the receiver can easily remember what's happened, at which point feedback becomes a memory game that the giver and receiver play with one another, each one trying to piece together different pieces of information that have likely become forgotten or distorted with the passage of time. And that distortion only serves to reinforce a fixed view of performance. This is who we are. This is how we're seen. And there's nothing really we can do about it to change or to improve, because that's how my manager or my colleague sees me. It's a very self-limiting, self-defeating view, and it's part of the collateral damage that is caused all the time by traditional performance management systems. The good news is that we can change all of that by adopting a mindset of performance agility. Leaders who adopt this kind of a mindset, this agile approach, don't tell others what to see. They show them where to look and help them see things all by themselves. I call these types of leaders mirror holders because they give people a better view of themselves. They aren't telling and selling. They're listening and learning. When you hold up a mirror for someone, there's still just one prevailing view, but it belongs to the person looking into that mirror, not you. Your job as a mirror holder is to make others in a position where they have the best possible view, and then to enlarge it and to expand it. Today's leaders need to be more like mirror holders, not window gazers. To be agile in the world of performance management is to be responsive to the ever-changing nature of performance. How our measure of work cannot be reduced to a single moment in time, but must account for the full extent of work over time. And unless we're bringing others into that conversation as partners, then we are likely going to miss out on that information. Not only that, but also opportunities to foster growth and trust with and for our employees. So, what does this all look like in practice? Let me share with you a strategy that I call the performance journey. If you're an agile team, you know all about retrospectives, right? And while I think it's a great idea for teams to get together at the end of a sprint, I've heard from more than a few clients who use Agile that these retros can sometimes feel a little too scripted, that the process of communication can feel a little too forced. People don't necessarily feel comfortable speaking their minds. So what ends up happening? The scrum master or the team leader ends up doing most of the talking and telling. And instead of unlocking insights, the retro simply reinforces opinions and beliefs. Not with performance journeys. This three-step process naturally shifts dynamics to partnership and two-way communication. Leaders ask questions instead of making statements, and they encourage the person on the other side of that conversation to really think about what's happened and, more importantly, what should happen next. So here's how performance journeys work. Stage one is the summit. Now, when you begin with a performance journey, you do something differently than you might do with a traditional performance management system or conversation. You open with a focus on strengths. Now, as we've said before, traditional systems, they tend to put people on defense. They look at people's weaknesses and all the ways in which they came up short. But in this first stage, the summit, the conversation goes right to that moment of success, that summit of performance, a personal strength or achievement. Here is where you get to be a mirror holder who helps others recall one of those peak moments. And you start with priming the pump, getting them thinking about that time of excellence, that moment of flow and peak. Tell me about something great that happened to you during the last sprint. When did you feel most accomplished in the last quarter? When do you feel most alive in your work? Set the stage during this stage and listen, really listen, because you might be surprised by what you hear. When I've shared this approach with executives and senior leaders, they're amazed to discover what they thought to be the employee's vision of success was not necessarily the one that the employee had for himself or herself. These moments may not be visible to the leader, but they're powerful milestones for the employee. And by starting with strengths, leaders can immediately set the conditions for a more constructive and a more revealing conversation to get information that they may not have had, but they sure wish they did. Next, we come to the trek. Now, even when we're successful, we rarely do it all by ourselves. Success is a team sport, which is why in this second stage, the trek, leaders focus on who and what made this moment possible. Maybe it was an unsung hero on the team. Maybe it was a change in tactics. It might have even been something that you, the leader, did without even realizing it. So ask the question, on your way to success, who helped you? What happened along the way? Not only will this process give leaders more insight, more intel on how conditions on the ground are affecting individual performance, but it will also reinforce the power of the team and how our collective success is so much stronger than the efforts of any single individual member. Research has shown that when we frame our success in terms of these larger contributions, we're more likely to feel supported and encouraged to take on future challenges. When we think about how far we've come, but do so in a way that's collective, how far we've traveled together, we're more likely to feel like we can do it all over again. And that brings us to the final stage of the performance journey, the climb. Now, doing something once, that's a moment, but doing it again and again, that's a habit. And as we look to build out the habits of high performance and set the conditions for continuous improvement, this third stage of the performance journey can really help. This is where, after guiding individuals to identify that moment of peak, that summit, and tracing the steps and the conditions that allowed us to feel successful, leaders now shift to what these individuals can do to scale success and achieve similar results in the future. But instead of telling them what to do and how to do it, we stick with the process of mirror holding and help others make those determinations for themselves. Ask them to imagine being in the situation all over again. What would they continue? What would they change? And what can you, as the leader, do to support that journey? Do people need more time or resources, external training or support? Giving others more room to think about their journey provides them with the space to actually fill it and to do so the way they best know how. Summit, trek, climb. When we practice performance agility and take a long-term view of development, we help others succeed on their terms, not ours. Well, that's a great way to guide performance over time, but what if you're facing a situation that requires just-in-time feedback? Can performance agility help leaders manage in the moment? Based on my experience working with leaders at all levels, I believe it can, but in order to move forward, we need to take a step back and reconsider the messages that we may be sending implicitly or explicitly every single time we provide corrective feedback. Many leaders out there maybe you work with one, maybe you are one, are simply not comfortable sharing tough feedback. They're worried about hurting feelings and creating awkwardness. Some are just flat out conflict averse. And so what ends up happening is that these leaders dodge and duck difficult conversations with a praise sandwich. They'll take all that uncomfortable feedback and they'll tuck it inside in between two pieces of praise. Here's an example. Literally just happened a week ago with the sales group that I was working with. John is one of your top salespeople, but he's developed kind of an annoying habit of talking over other members of the team during sales meetings. He's cutting people off, and it's only gotten worse with Zoom because you can't really pick up on the cues that are not transferable on the internet. And you want to say something, something has to be said, but you don't want to rock the boat with one of your rock stars. So what do? Praise sandwich. You start with something like this. John, you are one of our top sales guys. Praise. I did kind of realize that in the sales meeting the other day, you were talking over some people and it made them feel pretty uncomfortable. Critique. But you are doing so great with your numbers, John. Hey, just, be on the lookout for that, okay? Praise. Now, mission accomplished, right? No. First, it's likely that all John heard was the praise at either end of that sandwich. I'm a top performer and my numbers look great even though we're on virtual calls. He totally missed the critical middle. So you leave that encounter feeling like you've moved the needle. John feels like he's dodged a bullet when in reality, you're both still stuck at square one. Moreover, research indicates that people find praise sandwiches manipulative and unclear. The problem, just so we're clear with each other, isn't the praise, it's the sandwich. When people open up with praise, it feels like a sneaky way to lower our guard and then to deliver the boom. And when managers are dodgy with their information, it ends up leading to more confusion, not a resolution. But leaders who embrace performance agility don't try to sidestep issues. They tackle them head on with a message that's clear, constructive, and collaborative. They use an approach that's agile enough for those right now conversations and makes an immediate difference in how performance is managed in the moment. I call it a feedback wrap. Now, the wrap is a 4-part plan for having more candid, two-way conversations about work. And just like the performance journey that we spoke about before, it's built on a foundation of dialogue and partnership, on mirror holding. Now, WRAP stands for what and where, reason, affect, and prompt. So let's go back to our pal John and see if this WRAP approach can make a difference and how it can help you, the leader, get what you want while still allowing John to get what he needs. So start by de-escalating the conflict by naming the issue. What's happening? Where is it happening? So start like this. John, can we talk about something I observed in today's sales meeting? Now, with that simple introduction, you've just narrowed the scope of the conversation so that John's mind is not suddenly racing and bracing with all sorts of possible feedback scenarios. Today's sales meeting, that's what we're going to talk about. Not my numbers, not my hygiene, not my Zoom background. Next, state the reason why this matters. John, I noticed that some members of our team today were interrupted a few times. Kristen, Cameron, Paul, anytime they tried to stand up some information, you kind of cut them right off, and I felt like that caused a lot of discomfort among the team. Now, stating the reason for why you're bringing something up may seem counterintuitive. It may even feel condescending, but it's actually a crucial step. Oftentimes, we lack the self-awareness to understand how our words and actions are coming across to other people. We may not even be aware that we're doing the things that others are finding irritating. So give the reason. The clarity is comforting. So that's steps 1 and 2. But here's where the wrap really gets effective and is different than traditional feedback conversations. Instead of handing out a bunch of messages that feel like judgments, remember we talked about that before, describe the affect. What emotions is this causing? So rather than pointing a finger at John and telling him how your behavior is making all sorts of problems here, talk about the emotional toll that this is creating. John, I felt bad for Kristen and Paul and Cameron because they seemed rightfully frustrated when they couldn't get the airtime that they needed in that meeting. Now, this is a very effective change in tactics. Why? Because here's the human truth. People can argue with what we say, but they're less likely to disagree with how we feel. And when we shift from judgment to affect, we keep the conversation very focused and blame-free, which allows the fourth stage of the wrap to occur, the most important part of all, the prompt. Now remember, leaders who embrace performance agility operate with a sense of humility and curiosity. They don't tell and sell, they listen and learn. So once you've told John what's happening and where it's happening, once you've laid out the reasons for why it's discussion worthy and described the emotional toll that it's taking on others, stop, prompt, and listen. So John, what do you think? Where should we go from here? Now, in my experience, one of two things are going to happen. John may become defensive and dismissive and actively push back at you. It's unlikely, but it happens. But at least you know that the issue at hand here is a lot deeper than just talking over people at a meeting. You have actionable information to help you make an informed next step. So that's a win. But the more likely outcome is that John is actually going to really receive the message. After all, you've taken great care to frame the issue, to name the issue, to describe its rationale and its impact. And more importantly, you've created a space for John to weigh in. So he feels like he's empowered, that his voice matters, and that he can do something about this. By shifting away from praise sandwiches and embracing a wrap, you, as the leader, have now taken a crucial step towards solving your problem with clarity and candor. And you've done so by handing power and perspective back to John, the person who is ultimately responsible for turning performance into progress. When leaders try to be fixers instead of framers, when they aren't clear about their motives or their mission, that's when performance improvement stalls. The wrap approach gives leaders a more agile way to get the results they want and ultimately help others achieve the success they deserve. I hope you found these strategies helpful today. And I'd love to hear about ways in which you're bringing performance agility into your own organizations. Here are some ways that we can stay connected, and I hope we will. Performance management doesn't have to be painful. It can actually be a source of joy, not fear. And with the right mindset and message, it can restore more humanity at work, helping others discover the potential inside them that is always there and simply waiting to be unleashed. Thanks for learning.